At 28, Rachel Coyle had $43, a battered rolling suitcase, and a husband's signature quietly erasing her from a house she'd spent 6 years calling theirs. The one thing Garrett Vance never bothered to take was the worthless one, her father's lockkeeper's house, out where the Erie Canal runs past Corn Hill toward Pittsford. The Monroe County appraiser had valued the land under it at $9. Garrett told her to keep it. He was generous like that with things that were already trash. She walked the towpath to it in the last cold week of March, meaning only to wait out the winter in a dead man's rooms. But behind the rusted lock wheel, sealed inside iron her father had bolted shut 3 decades before she ever needed it. Something was waiting. By April, it would turn that $9 into the only number that ever counted. She just didn't know it yet. The suitcase was the same one. 3 weeks before she dragged it down that towpath, she'd wheeled it into a lawyer's office on the 4th floor of a glass building downtown, because she'd had nowhere to leave it and nowhere to go after. The room smelled of cold coffee and new carpet, the kind of room built to make a person feel small and call it procedure. Garrett's attorney was named Keller, a tidy man with a tidy stack of paper. He slid the settlement across the table like a waiter who had already been tipped. "It's clean," Keller said. "Cleaner than most. Clean." Rachel had learned what that word meant in rooms like this. It meant her name appeared nowhere it could do her any good. The house on Castle Bar Road, the one she had painted and planted and paid the school taxes on, was titled to Vance Riverfront Holdings. Not to Garrett, to a company. He had moved it into an irrevocable trust in their 2nd year of marriage, while she was keeping the books for his firm off a folding table and calling it a partnership. The cars, the accounts, the boat he never used, all of it sat behind a wall of letterhead, with her on the wrong side of it. "You're listed as a dependent," Keller said, almost kindly. "There's a number for that." The number was $4,000. A relocation courtesy, the paper called it. 6 years. And they had a word for her that meant luggage. Garrett sat at the end of the table looking at his phone. He had not looked at her once. He wore the watch she had bought him the year the business turned, back when she still thought turning meant turning toward her. Garrett. She waited until he raised his eyes. "Say it to me." Not to him. To me. He set the phone face down, patient as a man waiting for an elevator. "Rachel, we had a good run." He said it gently, which was worse. "Don't make it ugly. Ugly costs you more than it costs me." That was Garrett in one sentence. He called it prudence because men like Garrett preferred words that wore a necktie. She signed. Not because it was fair, because the alternative was a lawyer she could not afford against a man who billed his by the hour and never noticed the bill. Her own attorney, a name off a county list, had told her the truth for free. The trust predated the marriage on paper. It was airtight. Fight it and lose even the little they were letting her keep. So she wrote her name on the line under his. Her checking account held $43. That was the whole of what 6 years had earned her. Downstairs, the wind came off the Genesee mean and wet. Garrett was already at the curb, keys in hand, a black SUV idling like it had somewhere better to be. She caught up to him because she had one question left and no pride left to spend protecting it. "Where am I supposed to go, Garrett?" He almost laughed. Not cruel, amused. Amused was worse. "You've got that thing of your dad's, the Canal place." He turned his collar up against the river air. "The lock house. It's yours, free and clear." I had legal pull the file just to be sure. "Honestly, Rachel, take it. Nobody else is ever going to want it. It doesn't have heat. It's got a roof." Sort of. He opened the door. That whole stretch floods every spring. It's a flood claim waiting to happen, not a house. But your name's on it, not mine, so. He shrugged, the shrug of a man closing a very small account. "Consider it the settlement." Then he said the thing she would turn over in her head for a long time after, though never for the reason he meant it. "Face it. Your old man left you a wet basement and a rusty wheel. That's your inheritance." He dropped into the seat, locked the door behind you. The SUV pulled out onto Exchange and was gone. Rachel stood on the sidewalk until the cold got into her good shoes. Then she did the math she had been avoiding. $43. A suitcase she had packed in 20 minutes while Garrett watched from the doorway to make sure she took nothing titled to the company. A car with a quarter tank. And one address that was hers alone because it had never once been worth taking. Her father's house. Walter Coyle had kept the lock on the Canal for 31 years. Lock 32, the old maps called it. Though by the time Rachel was small, the working canal had shifted course and most people forgot the lock houses were ever lived in at all. He was a quiet man with cracked hands and a way of watching water that other men saved for church. He wore the same gray work coat until it went the color of the towpath. He smelled of linseed oil and pipe smoke and the river. He used to say one thing when the world leaned on her. When her mother left, when the money was thin, when a teacher told her she would amount to about what her father had, he would crouch down to her height, look at her steady, and say it plain. Water always finds its level. Rachel, you don't fight the current. You wait. It always finds its level. She had thought it was just a thing to say, the kind of thing fathers said because silence was harder. He had died 4 years back, quiet in his sleep the way he did everything. By then Rachel was already married, already learning to make herself small in a big house on Castle Bar Road. She went to the service. She took the folded flag they handed her for his years in the army and let Garrett steer her toward the car before the last hymn. Garrett did not care for cemeteries. They did not appreciate, he said, the lock house she had not gone back to since. Could not. It hurt in a place she kept locked herself. Now she had nowhere else. That afternoon she drove to where the pavement quit at the edge of the towpath, left the car, and lifted the suitcase out. The wheels were not made for gravel. They never are. She dragged it behind her the way a person drags anything they cannot carry and will not leave. The Erie Canal ran low and brown that time of year, waiting on the April rains to fill it. Across the water, the Shone Place lift bridge sat raised against the gray, and past it the lights of Pittsford were coming on for supper. Rochester kept its back to this stretch. The towpath smelled of wet stone and old rope, and the green rot of a canal between seasons. Her father's smell. Almost. Half a mile in, she passed a low shed set back from the path, its door held shut with a padlock gone orange with rust. She had never had a key to it. Neither had her father, far as she knew, which made no sense for a man who kept everything in its place. She had asked him once what was inside. He said ledgers and nothing more, and changed the subject the way he changed it around her mother's name. The light was nearly gone when the lock house came up out of the dusk. Squat, stone and clapboard. One chimney, 2 dark windows facing the water, like a face that had stopped expecting company. The lock chamber sat dry beside it, and over the gate the iron lock wheel stood where it had stood since before she was born. Rachel stopped at the door. The hasp held a padlock, but the key for it was on her father's ring, the ring the funeral home had handed her in a plastic bag 4 years ago, and she had never been able to throw out. She pulled the denim jacket tighter. It was the warmest thing she'd packed, and it was not warm enough. She did not turn around. There was no one behind her to see, and nothing ahead but a cold house and a dead man's quiet. She stood the suitcase upright on the gravel. Her ponytail had come loose in the wind, and she let it. For the first time in 6 years, nobody was waiting on the other side of a door to tell her she had done it wrong. She just stopped running. The key turned hard, then gave. The door swung into a dark that smelled of cold ash and linseed oil and 4 years of nobody. She felt for a switch out of habit. Nothing. The power had been off so long the meter had probably forgotten the house was there. Inside, her father's life sat under dust sheets the color of old snow. A table, 2 chairs, one of them always his, a wood stove gone cold, and on the wall by the door, a tide of pencil marks in his own hand, where he had measured the canal's rise every April for 31 years. The highest line stood well above her head. The water came in sometimes. The house had always stood. She found a hurricane lamp and a box of matches in the drawer where he had always kept them, because some men never move their matches, and the small flame threw the room into gold and shadow. It was through the back window, by that lamplight, that she saw the lock wheel up close again. Iron, 4 spokes, the rim worn smooth by her father's hands, and bolted to its housing, a riveted panel she had looked at 1,000 times as a child and never once thought to question. He had sealed that panel the year she was born. She knew it the way a person knows things they were told before they were old enough to keep them. She did not think on it long that first night. She was too cold, too tired, too newly nobody. She pulled her father's gray coat down off its peg, banked herself into it against the chill, and lay down on the floor of a house worth $9. She had no idea she was sleeping 10 feet from the reason her father had built his whole quiet life around that wheel. Morning came up gray off the water and found her before she was ready for it. Rachel woke on the floorboards with her father's coat pulled over her and the cold of the stone gone all the way into her hip. For one slack moment, she did not know where she was. She reached for the warm shape of a man who was not there and never would be again, and her hand met only the rough wool of the coat. And she remembered. The lawyer. The $4,000. The shrug at the curb. All of it came back in order, the way bad things do, politely, one at a time. She lay still and listened. No traffic, no furnace ticking, no phone lighting up on a nightstand with a message from a man who was never really writing to her. Just water. The low, patient sound of the eerie canal moving past the lock chamber, the way it had moved past it every morning of her childhood, brown and unhurried, going where water goes. It was the first sound she had woken to in 6 years that did not belong to Garrett. She got up because the floor gave her no reason to stay. In daylight, the house was smaller and sadder, and more hers. The dust sheets had gone the color of old snow, and where the morning came through the 2 front windows, it lit a slow drift of dust over her father's table, his 2 chairs, the cold iron belly of the wood stove. The tide of pencil marks still climbed the wall by the door, his careful hand recording every April the water had risen and every April the house had stood. She put her fingers on the highest line. It was above her head. He had written the year beside it. The spring, the canal came up over the towpath and into the cellar and out again, and the house had simply waited it out and dried and gone on. Water comes in sometimes, his marks said. The house stands. He had wanted her to know that. She had not understood the night before that the marks were a message. She was beginning to. She made herself useful because useful was the only thing she had ever been allowed to be. There was a hand pump at the stone sink, and after a dozen dry, groaning strokes, it brought up water cold enough to ache, rusty at first, then clear. There was a quarter cord of split wood, stacked dry in the lean-to off the back. Her father's wood, seasoned 4 years past the hand that split it, and a hatchet, and a coffee can of kindling. She built a small fire in the stove, the way he had taught her when she was 7, and proud to be trusted with a match. And the old iron took the flame and began very slowly to give back heat. She crouched in front of the open door of it with her hands out and felt the warmth come into her fingers, and something in her chest that had been clenched since the glass building downtown loosened by a single notch. That was the first hour. The first of many she would spend learning the house had been built by a man who expected her to need it. The cellar she left for last because Garrett's voice was in it. A wet basement and a rusty wheel. That's your inheritance. She found the hatch under a hooked rug by the stove and lifted it on a draft of cold earth and old stone, and she went down the ladder with the hurricane lamp held out ahead of her, half expecting the standing water he had promised, the ruin he had been so sure of. The cellar was dry, swept, shelved. Her father had built it up off the dirt with fieldstone and mortared it tight and racked it with shelves, and the shelves held the plain wealth of a careful man, jars, lamp oil, candle stubs, a wooden box of fuses, and a coil of good rope and a folded tarpaulin. Things a man lays in when he means a place to outlast him. She stood at the bottom of the ladder and turned the lamp slow around the room and understood that her father had not left her a wet basement at all. He had left her a place provisioned to keep a person alive through a hard season, and he had done it years ago, quietly, the way he did everything without once telling her why. It was on the cellar doorframe that she found the words. They were scratched into the wood at the level a man's hand falls when he steadies himself going down, low, where you would only see them if you were looking, or if you were small. The letters were uneven, dug in with a knife point over what must have been more than one evening, because the cuts went pale and then dark where he had gone back over them. She held the lamp close and read her father's hand. Water always finds its level. She sat down on the cellar step and cried then, finally, the way she had not let herself cry in the lawyer's office or at the curb or on the cold floor the night before. Not loud, her father's daughter, but it came up out of her and shook her because she had thought that line was just a thing he said to fill a silence, a thing fathers say because the truth is too heavy to hand a child straight. And here it was, cut into the bones of the house with a knife, where he must have stood some night years ago thinking of her, knowing already what she had not yet lived, that there would come a season when the world leaned all its weight on her, and she would have nowhere to put it. You don't fight the current. You wait. It always finds its level. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand and climbed back up into the light, and she did not feel quite so much like luggage. Money was money, though, and grief does not buy heating oil. She had $43 when she signed the paper and a little less now. She drove the car with its quarter tank into the village, into Pittsford proper, past the Schoen Place shops with their Canal side tables, not yet set out for the season, and she spent $11. She could not really spare on bread and eggs and a sack of dried beans and a box of wooden matches she did not need but bought anyway, because her father always had 3 boxes and never one. At the hardware on the corner, a man took pity on her accent of poverty and told her how to get the meter read and the power switched back without the deposit they ask of strangers, and she wrote it all down on the back of the receipt. She was learning to live on almost nothing. It is a skill, and the people who have it are not proud of it, and the people who have never needed it think it is the same thing as failure. Garrett thought that. Garrett had never in his life had $43 be the whole of a number. To him, the Canal house was a flood claim waiting to happen, because to Garrett, a thing was worth only what it would fetch. He could not have read the marks on the wall. He would not have known to look down low on a doorframe. He had measured her the same way, by what she would fetch, and found a number and called it clean. The woman came on the 3rd morning. Rachel was out on the towpath with a stiff broom, sweeping 4 years of wet leaves and goose mess off the stone apron in front of the door, when she saw the figure coming along the path from the Pittsford side. An older woman, broad and unhurried, in a quilted coat the color of cranberries, with a steel thermos in one gloved hand and a knit cap pulled down over white hair. She walked like the towpath was hers, the way people walk a thing they have walked 10,000 times, and when she got within speaking distance, she stopped and looked at the smoke coming up out of the chimney, and she looked at Rachel, and her face did a complicated thing. "Well," the woman said, "somebody's lit Walter Coyle's stove." "I'm his daughter," Rachel said. "I know whose daughter you are." The woman's eyes were wet and bright, and frankly searching her face. "Lord, you've got his chin. You're Rachel. You were so high when I saw you last you could walk under that lock wheel without ducking." She shifted the thermos to her other hand and put out the freed one. "Marion Pruitt. I knew your father 30 years. I'm down at the county clerk's office in the records room, what's left of me that they haven't retired. I walk this stretch every morning. My knees allow it. She tipped her head at the chimney smoke. 3 days I've watched that go up and told myself it was squatters. I'm glad to be wrong. Rachel took the hand. It was strong and cold. I didn't know he had friends out here, she said, and heard how that sounded and was sorry. I mean, he kept to himself. He kept to the water, Marion said, like that was a different and better thing. Come on, pour you a cup. My knees want the wall anyway. And she lowered herself onto the low stone coping at the edge of the lock chamber, as if she had done it 1,000 times, which, it would turn out, she had. They sat. Marion poured coffee into the thermos cup and made Rachel take it, and the steam went up between them into the cold, and across the water, the lift bridge at Schoen Place stood up against the gray, and the village began slowly to wake. Your father kept this lock 31 years, Marion said. Lock 32 on the old survey, though by the end the through traffic had moved off this cut, and it was mostly the historic boats and the kids and canoes and the geese. Didn't matter to Walter. He worked it like the whole commerce of the state still came through. You know how a lock works, child? You'd have watched him do it 100 times. I watched, Rachel said. I don't think I understood. It's the simplest patient thing in the world. Marion wrapped both hands around her own cup. A boat comes up the low side. He'd close the lower gates and let the water in from above. Slow, never fast. Fast wrecks things. And the boat would rise. Just sit there in the chamber and rise on the water coming in till it was level with the upper canal, and then he'd open the high gates and out she'd go. You don't lift the boat, you see. You can't lift a boat. You let the water lift it. You bring the levels even, and the boat rises on its own and walks right out the top. She smiled into the steam. Your dad used to say the whole trick of it was you had to be willing to wait. Couldn't be in a hurry. The water won't be hurried. It comes in at its own rate and it finds its level and the boat goes up. Every time. He could read that canal like other men read scripture. Knew it was going to crest 3 days before the rain ever came. Rachel held the warm cup and said nothing for a moment, because the cellar door frame was in her chest. Water always finds its level. She had thought it was comfort. It was instruction. Her father had been telling her, the whole quiet time she knew him, exactly how a small thing rises against a great weight, and she had been too young, and then too married to hear it. He never talked about himself, she said finally. I don't really know what he did out here, or why he cared so much about a lock nobody used. Marion looked at her a while. Something moved behind the old woman's face, some weighing, the look of a person who knows a thing and is deciding whether it is hers to tell. Your father did a great deal nobody used, Marion said carefully, and a great deal nobody saw. He was the kind of careful that looks like nothing from the outside. She nodded toward the iron lock wheel standing over the dry gate, the 4 worn spokes, the riveted panel bolted to its housing. You see that wheel? He oiled that wheel every week of his life, whether a boat came or not. Last few years, there wasn't a boat one season to the next, and still, every Sunday, out he'd come with the oil can. I asked him once what he was keeping it ready for. There's nothing to lock through, Walter, I said. Nothing's coming. What did he say? Marion's mouth went soft and her eyes went far off down the towpath into 30 years of mornings. He said, something's always coming, Marion. You just have to keep the gate able to open when it does. She shook her head slowly. I thought he meant the water. I think now he meant something else. I think your father spent 30 years getting a gate ready for a day he wouldn't live to see. She turned and looked at Rachel direct, and the look went through her. And here you are, sitting on his wall, with nowhere else to be, aren't you? Rachel could not answer that. It was too exactly true. They sat with it. The coffee cooled. A pair of geese came down onto the brown water with a long, ugly grace and folded their wings and went still. I'll tell you one thing, and then I'll let your fire be, Marion said at last, gathering herself to stand, a hand braced on the cold stone. There's been men down at the clerk's office these last weeks, suits, asking after this whole stretch of frontage, Cornhill down to the Pittsford line. Surveys pulled, old plats. Somebody's got an eye on this water. She got herself up with a grunt and looked, for just a second, troubled. Funny it should be now. The same week, Walter's girl comes home to light his stove. She capped her thermos. "You take care out here, Rachel Coyle, and you mind that wheel. Your father kept it oiled for a reason. Men like him don't waste a Sunday." She went off down the towpath toward Pittsford the way she had come, broad and unhurried, the cranberry coat getting small against the gray. Rachel stayed on the wall a long time after, the cold cup in her hands, looking at the iron wheel and the panel her father had sealed the year she was born. Across the canal, where the path bent toward Cornhill, a man she had not noticed before stood half in the brush with a phone held up, and he was not photographing the geese or the bridge or the pretty ruin of an old lock house in the morning light. He was photographing her door. She did not wave. She did not call out. Walter Coyle's daughter knew the worth of seeming not to have noticed a thing you had noticed completely. She set the broom against the door frame as if she were finished with it, and she went inside, and she stood back in the dark of the room where the glass would not give her away, and she watched him through it. He photographed the door a while longer, then the iron wheel, then the long stone flank of the lock chamber, panning the phone slow the way a man does when he is making a record for someone who will want to see all of it later. After a few minutes, a second figure came along the Cornhill bank to join him, a younger man in a soft jacket with a leather folder held flat under one arm, and the two of them stood and considered the lockkeeper's house across the brown water the way men consider a thing they have already decided to own. Then they went back up the towpath toward the city, toward the Genesee and the glass towers standing along it, and Rachel let the curtain settle. She knew that folder. She had seen folders exactly like it lying on Garrett's side of the bed for 6 years. The letter came 2 days later, certified, which meant the drive into Pittsford proper to sign for it at the little post office, because no carrier would leave a certified envelope at a door with no proper box. The return address was a firm on State Street she did not know, but the language inside she knew the way you know a voice through a wall, because it was Garrett's language wearing another man's suit. They were pleased to present an offer. Vance Riverfront Partners wished to acquire the parcel known on the county rolls as the old Lock 32 Keeper's House, together with its canal frontage and the adjoining towpath easement, for a sum that, written out, looked almost like mercy to a woman who had $40 and looked like an open insult to anyone who had stood inside the house and felt how much of her father was still holding the roof up. The number was $9,000. $9,000 for the house, the lock, the provisioned cellar, the wall of climbing pencil marks, the wheel he had oiled every Sunday of his life. She sat down on the cold stone, coping with the page in her hand, and did the arithmetic of contempt. $9 of land value, the appraiser had written, the day the lawyers cut her marriage into neat columns and put her in none of them. $9,000 now that Garrett wanted it for himself. The decimal had walked 3 places to the right, and not one board of her father's house had changed. Only Garrett's plans had changed. A thing was worth to him exactly what it would fetch him, and never a cent of what it was. She understood the whole of it a week later. They posted the notice on the towpath itself, a laminated sheet zip tied to the iron rail by the lift bridge at Showen Place, the kind of notice a village is made to put up so that afterward it can say it told you. Application for rezoning. A change of use along the canal frontage from Cornhill down to the Pittsford line, from historic and recreational to commercial marina and mixed residential. There was a rendering printed on it, an artist's bright idea of the future, white boats and clean slips, and people holding drinks on a boardwalk laid down where the geese now stood in the mud, and a name across the bottom in the confident type that money buys. Vance Riverfront Partners, Garrett's firm, Garrett's future, drawn in watercolor over her father's water. And she saw, standing there in the cold with the wind off the canal pulling at the page, exactly where the lockkeeper's house sat inside that pretty picture. It sat in the middle. It sat precisely where a man would want to put his welcome building or his restaurant, or more likely, nothing at all, a clean green lot of unobstructed view to sell the slips behind it. The one parcel on the entire stretch that the developer did not already control was the one his former wife had lit a stove inside. The worthless house had a price now. The price was the whole plan, and she was sitting on it. He came himself on a Thursday, which told her more than the letters had, because Garrett Vance did not drive out to things. He had things brought to him. She watched his car come down the service lane on the Pittsford side, too clean and too low for that gravel. And she watched him pick his way along the towpath in shoes that had never in their life met a loose stone. And she did not go out to meet him. She let him come the whole way to her door, the way the chamber lets a boat come the whole way in before the gates ever close behind it. Rachel. He smiled the smile she had married. God, look at you. You're really roughing it out here. He looked up at the smoke and the swept stone apron in the old house standing quiet in the gray, and something moved behind his eyes that she had not seen there once in 6 years, and it took her a moment to put a name to it because it sat so strangely on him. It was unease. You actually moved in. It's mine, she said. It's a liability, he said gently, the way a doctor lowers his voice. Sweetheart, that's the whole reason I came out here myself. I'm trying to do you a kindness before this turns into something neither of us wants. He opened his hands toward the canal and the towpath and the wide, cold morning. This entire bank floods. You know it floods. Your old man practically bailed this place out every April of his life. The structure is condemned in everything but the paperwork. I'm handing you $9,000 and a clean walk away, which, between you and me, is about $8,900 more than a flood claim waiting to happen is actually worth. He tipped his head at her, patient, reasonable. Take the number, Rachel. Don't make this into a thing. She said no. She said it the way her father had oiled the wheel, without heat and without hurry, as a thing simply done because it was hers to do. And she watched the kindness go out of Garrett's face the way a tide goes out, all at once and faster than you expect, leaving the flat, hard sand of him that she had spent 6 years calling by softer names. All right, he said, then let's be adults about the law. And here it came, the true reason he had driven out, the part the soft-jacketed man with the folder had drawn up. The house, he explained, had come to her during the marriage. Her father had passed during the marriage. Anything a wife inherits while she is a wife is, under the law, a marital asset, subject to division, the same as the house downtown, the same as the cars, the same as the accounts he had already swept clean. He had been generous, he said, not to have claimed his half of it before now. He was being generous again, offering to buy out an interest he was entitled to simply take. I would truly hate to have to file, he said, and his voice had gone warm once more, which was worse than the cold had been. But I will. I have people who do exactly this in their sleep. And you have. He glanced at the house, the chimney, the broom, a wood stove. He gave her 2 weeks. Then he walked back up the towpath to his clean, low car, and a week after that, the second certified letter came, and this one was not an offer. It was a notice of claim and a date, a hearing, downtown in the county building, where a judge would decide whether the Lock 32 keeper's house belonged to Rachel Coyle alone, or to the marriage that Garrett Vance had already dissolved on every front that held money, keeping all the parts that were worth something and leaving her the single part he had been certain was worth nothing at all. She read it standing in the cellar, under the words her father had cut into the doorframe with a knife point on some long evening before she was old enough to read them. Her hands shook, and the old line did not feel like comfort, and it did not feel like instruction. It felt like a cruel joke. Water always finds its level. She had $40 and a wood stove and 2 weeks, and Garrett had the whole flat gray weight of the river standing behind him. And water, when there is enough of it and it is moving fast, does not find any gentle level. It simply takes the house and everything in it. She went to Marion Pruitt. She did not know where else in the world a person was supposed to go. The records room of the Monroe County clerk sat in the basement of the county building downtown, past a metal detector and a long, worn counter. A low, cold room of rolling steel shelves and the particular dry smell of old paper kept too many years in a place with no windows. Marion was at a wide oak table under a green banker's lamp with a magnifier mounted on a stand. And when Rachel told her the whole of it, the letter and the claim and the date and the marital asset, the old woman set down her pencil very carefully and was quiet a long moment. "Marital asset," Marion said at last, and there was a flatness in how she said it. The held face of a card player who has just been dealt the one card she was praying for and will not let her eyes give it away. He would have to prove it came to you inside the marriage. "When did your father pass, child?" 2 years ago. We had been married 4 years by then, and the house came to you in the will. That is what the lawyer told me. There was not much. The house and whatever was in it. Marion studied her over the top of the magnifier. "A will," she said slowly, "moves a thing to you on the day a man dies. But a will is not the only way a man can move a thing to his child. There is another way, and it is a quieter way. And your father was the quietest man I ever knew in my life." She got herself up, knees and all, and went down the steel shelves reading the spine labels with one finger. "If Walter ever deeded this house to you outright, in your own name, recorded right here in this office, before ever you married that man, then the house was never the marriage's to divide in the first place. It was yours before there was any marriage to speak of, and you cannot split between two people a thing that one of them already owned alone." She drew out a great flat volume of old recordings and brought it back into the lamp and began to turn the heavy, brittle pages. The only question is whether he did it, and whether the paper still says he did. She found the line. Rachel watched her find it, watched the old finger stop and go still against a row of faded entries, and watched Marion Pruitt's whole face change. There had been a recording, a transfer of the Lock 32 parcel, grantor Walter Coyle, grantee, and here the old woman's breath caught in her throat. Grantee Rachel Coyle, recorded 28 years ago that very spring. The spring Rachel was born. "He deeded it to you when you were an infant," Marion whispered. "Separate, in your name and no one else's, 28 years ago." And then her face fell, because the entry was only an index, a pointer that said a document had once been placed here. And when she pulled the bound volume the index sent her to, the page was gone. Not gone, ruined. A whole signature of pages swollen and blistered and run together into a brown brick of dried pulp. The ink bled away to gray ghosts, and Marion remembered aloud, bitterly, the year this very basement had taken water in a hard storm, and how much of the old run had spoiled before anyone thought to carry it up the stairs. The recording had happened. The record of the recording survived. But the deed itself, the actual document, the one carrying Walter Coyle's signature, and the words he had chosen to write, the single piece of paper a judge could lay his hand on and weigh, had been drowned into nothing in this room years ago. "The index proves a deed was recorded," Marion said. "It does not prove what the deed said. It does not prove it was clean or truly separate or never revoked. His lawyer will stand up and call it a gift in trust or defective or undone by the marriage. We need the original, Rachel, the copy your father kept for himself. And a man like Walter Coyle never once in his life trusted a basement to hold the only copy of anything that mattered to him." She looked up over the lamp. "So you think, where would your father put the one thing he most wanted you to have?" Rachel drove home in the dark with the question riding beside her in the passenger seat the whole way. A man like Walter never trusted a basement. She knew that about him already, in her bones. She had stood in the bone-dry cellar he had built up off the bare dirt on mortared fieldstone, while Garrett's voice in her memory called it a wet ruin. Her father had hidden nothing in the obvious place and trusted nothing to the easy one. She walked the house that night with the hurricane lamp, slow, looking at it the way you finally look at a thing you grew up never seeing. She tried the towpath shed again first, the low plank building set against the lock wall that had been padlocked her entire childhood, the one she had never once in her life seen standing open, the one for which there had been no key on the ring the lawyer pressed into her hand with the rest of the house. She held the lamp to the hasp. The padlock was her father's, good brass, long gone green, and it held fast, and there was no key, and there had never been a key, and she stood with her cold hand flat against the cold wood and felt certain, for no reason she could have spoken aloud, that whatever waited behind that door mattered. But it would not give tonight, and the answer to a hearing in 2 weeks was not behind a lock she had no way to open. The answer was where her father had told her, all along, to look. "Mind that wheel," Marion had said that he said. "Your father kept it oiled for a reason. Men like him do not waste a Sunday." Rachel went out onto the cold stone apron in the dark, with the lamp swinging gold against the black water, and she stood in front of the iron lock wheel, the 4 worn spokes, the riveted steel panel bolted into its housing, the panel her father had sealed, shut the year she was born. 28 years ago that spring. The same spring, she understood now, her hand going cold against the metal, that he had walked downtown to this county building and recorded a deed in the name of a daughter 3 weeks old, and then come home along this same towpath and sealed something away behind the very wheel he would go on oiling every Sunday of his life, keeping the gate able to open, he had told Marion. For the day, something finally came. She set the lamp down on the coping. She ran her fingers along the riveted seam where the panel met the housing, feeling for the edge of it in the dark, because there are things the hands find truer than the eyes ever will. And under 4 years of grime and 28 years of canal weather, her numb fingertips found it. A seam that was not quite a seam. A panel made to look bolted shut for good, and not bolted at all. An edge that moved, a hair, then more than a hair, under the press of her thumb. You have already guessed what your father sealed behind that wheel. 3 weeks after you were born, on the day he made certain you would never in your life be without a roof over your head. You have not. The panel did not swing, and it did not fall. It lifted clear of the housing, the way a lid lifts off a thing that was only ever made to look bolted down for good, and Rachel set it on the coping and held the lamp into the dark behind the wheel. There was a hollow cut back into the lock wall, dry as a held breath, mortared in above the line of the worst water the canal had ever carried, because the man who built it had measured every flood of his life and set the recess a hand's width higher than the highest of them. And in the hollow square on a bed of waxed cloth sat a tin. She lifted it out with both hands and knew before it cleared the wall that it was not empty. It had the close, settled weight of a thing packed full. A flat oil tin gone the soft brown green of old paint, and screwed down into the lid was a small brass plate, and in the plate a keyhole. For a moment she only crouched with it on her knees and the cold coming up through the stone into her bones. Then she understood, and the understanding went through her like the first crack of the gates. Among all the keys the lawyer had poured into her palm with the rest of the dead house, there had been one small brass key, worn smooth as a river stone, that had fit no door she owned and turned in no lock she had tried, and she had carried it loose in her jacket pocket every day since, unable to say why she could not make herself set it down. She took it out now with fingers that would barely obey her. It slid into the brass plate as though the two had been cut on the same bench on the same morning. It turned. The lid came up on the smell of old paper and lamp oil. the very smell of Marion's records room, the smell of things a careful man keeps against a day he hopes will never arrive. On top lay a single folded sheet. Beneath it, a heavier fold of stiff paper gone amber at the creases, and under that, wired to the floor of the tin with a twist of copper, a second brass key with a paper tag. Her hands went to the heavy fold before her mind could send them, and she opened it across her knee in the swimming lamplight, and there at the head of it, in the careful, upright print she would have known blind, was her own name. A deed. The deed. The Lock 32. Parcel set down corner to corner in Walter Coyle's plain hand, the grantor his name, the grantee hers, and no other living souls, and along the foot the inked stamp of the Monroe County clerk, and a date 28 years gone, that very spring, 3 weeks to the day from the morning she was born. And below the lines the law required, where the law required nothing at all, her father had written one line more. To Rachel, separate and hers, for the day she has nowhere else. She did not cry the way you cry at a graveside. She cried the way the ice goes off the canal in March, all at once and from underneath, a thing that is held hard a whole season, giving way in a single afternoon. Then she wiped her face with the heel of her hand and read the letter, because his hand was on that too, and she was greedy now for every word he had thought to leave her. It was short, the way everything he had ever said to her had been short. He had deeded her the house when she was 3 weeks old, he wrote. Because a man who tends a lock learns young that you do not wait on the flood to tell you where the boat will sit. You tie it off on high ground while the water is still low and friendly, and then you let it rise. He had told no one, not the bank, not a lawyer downtown, not her mother while she lived. He had kept the parcel in her name alone every year of her life, and the whole of that keeping was set down in the shed, and the second key would open the door he had never once let her see standing open. He was sorry he had not been a richer man. He had given her instead the single thing he was certain no one with money would ever trouble to want. And if she was reading this at all, then the day he had spent her whole life praying away had come after all, and she was to do exactly the thing he had spent that life making her able to do. She was to stand still. She was to let the paper speak and keep her own voice low. The water would do the rest. She went up the towpath in the black cold with both keys and the lamp swinging gold against the reeds, and the second key bit into the green padlock on the plank shed that had stood shut every day of her childhood. The one door at Lock 32 she had never in her life seen open, and the old hasp dropped into her hand like a thing that had only been waiting to be let go. Inside, on plank shelves her father had hung level and true, stood the ledgers, 30 of them, near enough, one to a year, the cloth spines furred with Canal damp, but the pages inside dry and square, and filled edge to edge in that same upright hand. Taxes paid to Monroe County, the date and the sum and the receipt number copied beside each. The parcel carried current, year on year on year, a small amount set aside each spring against the next, a keeper's wage portioned out with the patience of a man who had portioned out water for a living. 3 decades of a quiet, unbroken discipline, every entry of it saying the same plain thing in the only language her father had ever fully trusted. The house was hers. It had always been hers. He had made it so, the way he made everything so, slowly and alone, and without one word of thanks asked of anybody. The hearing was held downtown in the county building in Rochester on a gray Tuesday, in a low room with poor light and the flags standing furled in their stands. Garrett Vance came in his good coat with the soft-jacketed man and the folder, and he did not look at her once, which she understood now was not contempt at all, but the long habit of a man who has never had to watch the face of the person he is taking from. His lawyer was smooth and certain. He spoke of the marriage, of the property a wife receives while she is a wife, of an inheritance fallen to her in the years she carried the Vance name, of a division clean and fair under the law. He spoke a long time, and he built the whole of it, brick laid on brick, upon the single stone he never once thought to test, the easy assumption that the house had come down to Rachel Coyle the day her father passed. He poured everything he had into that one channel and never looked to see where the channel ran. Rachel said almost nothing. When the judge turned to her, she stood, and she laid two things on the table and stepped back from them. The deed, with its stamp and its date. The topmost ledger, open to the year. Marion Pruitt, who had driven down and sat the whole morning in the back row in her good coat, came forward when she was asked and set her finger on the recording line in the bound index and said, in her dry, flat voice, that the transfer had been entered in that office 28 years ago that spring. Grantor Walter Coyle, grantee Rachel Coyle, separate, and that she had kept the county's records 1 in 30 years and would stake every one of them on the hand that wrote it. And the room went still around the date, because there was nothing left in the law for Garrett Vance to say to a title that had been hers and clear and recorded decades before his name was ever spoken in her hearing. The gate he had not seen opened beneath him, and the whole weight of his argument ran straight out of it, and he had built the thing too well to climb back up. He looked at her then. It was the first time in 6 years he had looked at her and found nothing of his own looking back. Sitting very still in that gray room, she thought of the words her father had knifed into the cellar door frame before she was old enough to read them, and for the first time in her life, they did not read as a riddle, and they did not read as a wound. The judge voided the purchase option from the bench. Within the month, the Monroe County clerk had entered the deed afresh into the active record. Clean ink laid over the drowned old line, separate property of Rachel Coyle, hers and no one's after. The laminated rezoning notice came down off the iron rail by the Schoen Place lift bridge and did not go back up, because a single keeper's house that no developer on the Genesee could buy or take had been set down in the very middle of the watercolor, like a stone wedged in a doorway, and the white boats and the boardwalk and the bright printed future under the name Vance Riverfront Partners had nowhere left in the picture to stand. Before the leaves turned, the Canal Authority listed the Lock 32 keeper's house on the historic register, and on a cold, bright morning, a county crew set a small bronze plaque into the towpath stone beside the lock wall. The name cut into it was Walter Coyle, keeper, and below his name, the years he had stood there, and below those, a single line declaring the house and the lock and the bank around them were to be kept as they were, for good, so that no one who came after could ever again be told their home was worth $9 and shown to the door. She unpacked the suitcase on a Sunday evening, slow, the way her father had done everything, setting her few folded things into the drawer that still held the clean cedar smell of his. She built the stove up until the iron ticked and the last of the cold went out of the front room, and then she walked the house in the falling dark with a lit match cupped in her hand, and she put a flame to every lamp she owned, the hurricane lamp and the 2 oil lamps off the shelf, and the small one she had carried up from the bone-dry cellar, one to each window that faced the water, until the lock-keeper's house stood on the bank, throwing its whole light out across the black canal, the way it must have stood on the nights her father kept it. Down on the towpath, the geese had settled into the reeds. The current went on by the closed gates the way it had gone by them for 200 years, unhurried, sure of where it was bound. The suitcase stood empty by the door. In every window, the lamps burned gold on the black canal water.